Hi all, welcome to the next edition of Amnic Cast. We are back with Sreedhar Gade again. Again, it's a three-part series. Just to give a brief recap, initially we talked about the use cases. Sreedhar walked us through different segments, like from startup to mid-size to enterprise, what kind of generative AI use cases they do and how they do it. In the second episode, we actually talked. He talked about how we can actually scale this in production. Right now, we are coming into very important stuff. Now, once you put into production, how do you actually make it? What kind of governance that you need to have, right? With that, I welcome Sreedhar Gade again. Welcome back, Sreedhar.
Thanks, Sathya. Good to be back on this series. And this is, like you just said, it's probably the most important aspect of generative AI that everyone needs to know. So this is all about, we showed you one most powerful tool or a system on the planet. I wouldn't call it a weapon or anything else, but it's a most powerful tool. Now we are going to teach you about the safety. How do you actually make sure that it doesn't do the things that you don't intend it to do, right? But before we jump into governance slides and discussion, I would like to show you a couple of slides about what's happening in the market today. That kind of backs up all the efforts that we are putting in generative AI. So the disruption has already started. We all know that in 2023, the ChatGPT took the world by storm in Q1, and after that, we saw the plethora of LLMs, and then in all the hyperscalers started backing it up with the AWS came with the Bedrock. It's a kind of a model garden, and Google came with the Google Vertex, but they also had an ML library built with multiple LLMs. And then Azure obviously partnered with OpenAI initially as their exclusive offering, but then they also started their ML library where they have Llama and all other offerings. So you could see this bunch of hyperscalers coming up with it. But if you look at it in the technology already, 88% of software developers reported higher productivity. Right, this is about developer productivity. And if you see the consumer in the market, you're talking about higher conversion rate. If you're looking at a biopharma, a drug that used to take months and years, now it can be actually generated in 21 days. Right, this is all about intellectual capability. That what can you do with a neural network in the past and now? If you look at see the order of magnitude is totally at a different level. And then there's entertainment, there's the financial institutions, and also the insurance. So these are the different. There's no specific industry. It is across the board. It's making waves. It's all about identifying a use case that works for your customers, and see how you can build that use case in the AI, and then boom, then you are in the market, and then you already started disrupting it. So things are changing very fast every week, every month, and a lot to learn there. There is a slightly a different representation of, hey, what can happen in next, say, 5 to 7 years. So today we are talking about 2023. It's about $18 billion is a rough estimate across the select industries. On the right side, you could see BFSI, consumer, healthcare, media, public sector. So these are the different markets, and we are talking about the growth, like the CAGR each year, starting from 94%, 90%. It's all in 90s in next 3 years, which means that we are going to double, and eventually it is actually going to reach $1 trillion by 2032. In next 7 to 8 years, the generative AI market is going to be a $1 trillion. And to me, if you ask me, that is probably an underestimation, and it could be much further than as well. And then it kind of compounded. So that kind of establishes the fact that all the efforts and the discussions that we have been having, or the entire market that is going, it's not hype, but it is here to stay. And we all have to actually get onto the bandwagon to kind of leverage and ride the wave. And then I show you like a couple of slides again. This is, before we jump into the governance slides, is also that a bunch of feedback came to me asking, hey, how do I create a business value through generative AI? Folks are saying that, hey, you have to use generative AI. I'm a automobile engineer, or I'm a scientist in pharma, but like, how am I going to use it? Is it general purpose or not? So here is an example. Not it's an example from SaaS industry, but then it kind of gives you a way, kind of a workflow of like how do you actually evaluate this. So on the left side, you could see there is a use cases, like one of the use cases could be code generation. Today, code generation is done by developers. They sit and code. and modify, and that's the traditional way of actually building code. And then there's also article summarization. This is also mostly manual, but then people use Word, Excel, and stuff like that, and then actually they kind of bring it up. Email generation. This is mainly for marketing, for campaigns and everything. People use mail merge or all these old technologies. There is a good chance for human errors. There's a delay, inefficiency, but then we live with it because there's no better solution till now. Now, I know these are the use cases that my customer want us to improve, and then I take these use cases and then start actually applying it to LLM. So I just gave a couple of examples here like Llama and OpenAI, but there are a bunch of other things that we spoke about last time. So let's take one example of code generation. So my developers have been developing it, but then how about I ask OpenAI? One good example is, hey, I want to build a shopping cart for e-commerce website. I could just get the code and update it myself because shopping cart is nothing novice. But then I just ask OpenAI just through a textual prompt and ask it to actually give me a shopping cart, and then it actually gives you a working code right away, right off the bat. Run it, and then before you know, like maybe in a couple of hours, basically you basically have it a working code, and then you probably understand that okay, this is one example of how I can actually improve developer productivity. Same thing with article summarization and stuff like that. And once we and this is a simplified example. This only has 3 use cases, but you could have 30, and you could have 5 different LLMs, and then you do this trial and error method with multiple things, and by the time you reach to the third section, which is the product features, you already have, for example, if I look at code generation, you build a shopping cart, and then finally you integrated generative AI in DevOps pipeline. It becomes a default, right? So instead of building code, we build prompts, and we ask it to what to do in the pipeline. It builds the code, and then the built code goes through the testing and performance and complaints and SOX and everything else, right? So that is the end state. And once it is done, then you are basically talking about a new revenue stream is actually generated. Why? Because traditionally, if I have 100 developers, I could probably build 10 use cases, but with the generative AI, I could probably do 12 use cases, right? With the same limited amount of developers. And then those additional 2, I always wanted to develop it, but then I couldn't because of bandwidth constraints, or maybe there is not enough skill in my team. Now it's all level playing field, and I could actually achieve it through generative AI. Yeah. So this is a quick summary, and this is the last, before we jump into governance. So this slide basically tells you where the governance kind of fits in. So in general, if you are a CIO or a CTO, you're starting for the first time with generative AI in your company, you might want to look at a bunch of use cases built through generative AI. The generative AI is nothing but large language models given by the hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, and but then they are large models. They have 500 billion, or so anywhere between 100 billion to 1 trillion tokens, or the parameters trained. So which are they are large, but then they are very good at text generation. So all the whatever you see in orange, those are the use cases they are very good at, right? Because they are trained on English language. But if you want to go for a very specific industry domain specific ones, like for example demand forecasting for a finance team, or you want to do something called dynamic pricing engines, for an e-commerce company, then it's very specific niche. So that's where you call something called discriminative AI, where I take a smaller model like a 7 billion or 13 billion parameters and train the hell of it just on this particular function, and then just deploy it, and then it'll work. So my recommendation would be use a combination of both, depending upon what your company can actually take. The one circle could be bigger and one less, but if you have both, I think it'll kind of really help the business. And then at the bottom, you're talking about a model security, model governance, security governance, privacy, user abuse governance. So the entire governance layer is actually as a foundation for these two, without which it's very quick. It can actually go south as a company, right? At this point, Satya, any thoughts before we jump into
Well,
the
I think this
actual?
is amazing to actually summarize what we have been discussing on the use cases and how it fits in, how the model, and then I think you have also now got into like how the governance fits into discriminative versus generative AI. With that, I think we can start looking at why you need governance and how do you actually get into that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'll go to the next slide, and so essentially, we are a lot of folks ask like, why do we need governance, right? So governance, essentially, there are the three main reasons why we need this. One is the compliance part. In many cases, folks are so if you look at the security, the SaaS world, the primary reason it actually started is mainly because of complaints, because complaints and customers. So customers basically want us to have this certification before I sell this to them, right? So those two still holds good here, but more importantly, the third one, which is how do I protect my company from any kind of a legal battle, or people actually breaking in and trying to steal your IP or have the moral drift and behave in a certain way that you don't intend it to do. So there are a lot of things that can happen that you will see in following slides that that can actually take the company or the business sideways. And that's why it's very important that we build a separate function within the company. Just like I said before, we create a separate function or a group of or a center of excellence for generative AI. This will be a sub function within that group,
Mm.
which is full time focusing on generative governance. So I will show you a model, but before I show you the model, what is the industry doing today? Is each company and each organization is taking different approach for governance, right? So I'll there is a spectrum of it, but there is a basic and then all the way to advanced. But I'll give you both the examples so you get an idea. So if you look at on the left side, so like some companies, what they do, if you're using OpenAI, as your LLM, all they do is, hey, I'm using OpenAI as an LLM, and here is the OpenAI's privacy policy, how we take care of your data, how you handle the data, and then that's about it. That's the simplest way of doing it, which means I don't do any training internally. I don't use multi models. I don't do discriminative. It's just one generative AI, which actually comes from a third party, and then I just use it. So any thing that can go south in terms of governance will be redirected back to that company, and it's kind of published openly. So that's a very basic level deflection or a redirection, right? And then there are other companies where who actually build and own up a lot of it. There are companies who actually make sure that if they are doing training, they remove PI, right? Personal identifier data, PI, and then that anonymized data is actually used to train the particular models, and then they actually put out in privacy policies very specific. Now every company, every SaaS product company or any company which is using generative AI is building privacy policy for generative AI specifically, which is apart from the existing privacy policy or data handling policies. And that basically has how we are actually taking, looking after your data, and then how we are not using it to train models and stuff like that. And on the right extreme, if you look at it, there's something called super alignment, which is started by OpenAI again. And because this is one company, it started this storm of GenAI, and they're also looking at to see like how do we also build a governance for the entire world. So super alignment is all about, it's a massive project which is actually taking up maybe like hundreds and thousands of engineers are going to work over next 5 years relentlessly to build a system. um, as generative AI is progressing with its capabilities in 2023, 24, 25, in parallel they are building the super alignment system, which will the ultimate goal is to actually build a kind of a governance layer around it, so that you as humans, we have oversight and control over what AI systems can do, and they actually do that, right? And rightfully so, it's a massive project, and it will use other LLMs and generative AI only. It's about how do you protect against generative AI using generative AI. A lot of Gen AI words, but this is the spectrum. So, if any company who's looking to start with the governance, I would suggest these 5 pillars, and this is an exhaustive list. I wouldn't expect a company to start with all of them to start with, but then I also gave the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is actually the priority order, and then you could actually start with data governance. Data governance is all about what do we do with the customer data, and how do we actually take care of it. So it's a safeguard sensitive information in AI systems. GDPR, we are talking about PI, data controls for training and tuning, data anonymization, fairness, and non-discrimination. So these are the bare minimum areas that we need to take care. And even if as a SaaS product company, you go to your customer and say, hey, my features have generative AI, they're going to ask these questions to you, right? They're going to basically say, hey, well, are you using my data to actually train? Can other customer or my competitor, who could be your customer, will they see my data? Because earlier you have isolation as a SaaS company, you have multi-tenancy, but now situation is such that it is basically once the functionality is actually coming from the model, it could be so that if my data is used to train the model, then my competitor could see, right? That's a good possibility, and that's what they are worried about. Second one is corporate governance. So this is about non-engineering teams leveraging AI could jeopardize your company's assets, right? And then a simple example is an intern in finance team trying to work with the company finances spreadsheet, and then just heard about, hey, new LLM that came in, Bard. Okay, let me actually copy the entire Excel sheet and actually paste it and ask it to summarize it. It would summarize, but at the same time, your company's finances are basically in public domain
Mm.
in some shape or form. And how do you prevent that? So it's all about training them and making sure that there's accountability and the inherent responsibility is there and stuff like that. Third one is security. Security is actually traditional security of data at rest, data in transit, disk level encryption, all that good stuff that we have. So we do the same thing for generative AI as well. We also want to make sure that IP based, geo based restrictions, just to make sure that you limit the exposure these systems have across the board. And obviously you need to build some kind of a solid telemetry. We spoke about it in our first edition of this series about how do we build metrics and telemetry, which is also equally important to be able to manage. Fourth one is model governance. It's very, very interesting. Model governance is all about there is some authoritative team within your company evaluating models, benchmarking them, and kind of approving for usage. So model is a very powerful functionality engine where depending upon what prompt you give, it gives the output. If that is not supervised or that is not governed properly, then the functionality of your system can go in many different ways. And that's why I think model governance is very important. So there are certification process, and in the process, you also want to have your legal department, your general counsel or legal department be the every time it actually your one model goes to production usage, then the legal has to sign off for it, and then you basically have a model drift and all those good stuff you need to look at it. Last but not least, functional governance, we call it bias, fairness, all this good stuff. And this is also a little subjective and it's very complex. And a lot of companies are trying to figure out how we can achieve reduction of bias, because in a language of English, there are many different ways it words and sentences can be interpreted. So we are learning as we speak, but these are equally important as well.
So, Sridhar, just quick question on this, right? So, when we talk about, let's say, model drift and all, right? In a traditional stuff, you have a language and then the legal can vet it. But in this, your English itself is getting generated every time, right? So, any thoughts on like how would you, because you can't cover all possible cases, right? If you once your LLM is open, I can do what I want, and there is no one to check what it's going to be, right? It's not like a logic that's written, right? Any
Right.
thoughts on like how that is going to evolve?
No, absolutely. I think it's a great question. Today, there is a lot of ambiguity in terms of what the outcome would be for each of your prompts and each of your inputs, right? And so in the old world or the current world, I mean, we are already in generative AI, so we are calling the traditional SaaS as the old world. But then you have a piece of code that you execute, and it will always behave the same way you execute it today or 10 years later, because you built it and it has certain functionality, and the functionality does not change unless you change the code. Generative AI is not like that. Its functionalities can change based on what you ask it. It can learn
Yeah.
from the prompts. It can learn from prompt injection. It can learn from the responses that are coming out. So that's why I think legal departments are very keen on knowing, hey, how do you keep the predictability is one very key factor of this particular model. And like that's where the model drift comes. So basically, lack of predictability is actually drift. Right. So there are certain parameters and certain metrics to measure this. So if I give a standard prompt, a standard ask from the input, and over and over, with different angles, and then what the response is coming back and how different it is from usual. And so legal teams and also the compliance teams are asking for periodic checks, as frequent as monthly checks of your use cases to look at the model drift and bias and this stuff. So this is a manual way of doing it. This is more like a human oversight. There's a team sitting it. Now we are also trying to build certain trained models, who could actually whose full-time job is to actually see, compare before and after kind of setup for models as well, which are kind of a work in progress. But this is a huge area, and if anybody actually breaks this code, I think will be a great startup idea as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Sridhar.
Yeah. So these are the five pillars, and anyone who is on the call, feel free to borrow this. And I think this is a good, and feel free to give us a feedback in terms of if you found something new. And in the next slide, we are going to show you some case study. This is how governance is implemented in Microsoft World, right? By Microsoft 365. All of us are aware the Copilot has become so popular across the world, but then Microsoft is the one company which leveraged it more than anyone else. Which means every product that they have today has a Copilot, and it really changing the life of the people, and in many different contexts and many different ways. So if you look at it here, the Microsoft 365, all the applications, like you said, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and everything else, they use large language models now. It actually the whatever you actually. Let's talk about how the Copilot works, for example, in PPT, right? For this example, for the sake of this example, in an earlier case, if I have to create a PPT, PowerPoint for 3 slides for my board, I will have to actually do it by hand. So create 3 slides and then get the data, and create some keywords, and build some charts and put it. Now, on the top right, I get an option where I could just copy the entire Excel sheet, including the formatting, and just paste it. And in the prompt, I can just ask, I need 3 slides, which should be consumable by board of a company which is of $1 billion revenues, and it should have a combination of text and images, and then boom. Then you basically have this three. It actually gives you 3 different or 4 different options with the different templates and everything you could choose from. Now, for it to be able to do that, you have the data here, right here, but then for that format to be built, it needs to go to OpenAI and come back. So the whole journey you can see here. Number one, actually, it goes something called in the middle. They built a kind of a broker in the middle, okay, and so that one basically looks at every prompt that is growing, right? That is good. That is actually, it's called prompt. And then number two, it actually goes to something called Microsoft Graph, the bottom left. So Microsoft Graph is actually a Microsoft product, but it has a combination of a vector search, vector database, and other semantics, where it could actually see if there is an abuse, or there's a bias, or if there's anything that is malicious, and all that is kind of looked at it. And once it is reviewed, the same prompt actually goes back, which is number 3, to the large language model, which means every prompt that the user gives in M365 products like Excel, Word, is going through Microsoft Graph for verification in a sub-second, like a sub-millisecond latency. So it is completely oblivious to the users. It's a transparent, but then it is being checked. But if they find something abused, it actually blocks the prompt. Otherwise, it goes to OpenAI. OpenAI basically creates the slides or whatever information and sends it back. But the response also does not go to the user directly, but it goes back to your Microsoft Graph, and the Graph again checks, does the response have anything malicious before it goes back, and if there is anything, it blocks completely, and the response is sent back to the user. So now you have two-way protection both ways, and this is a self-learning system. You could actually moderate it. You could cases where black and white, 0 or 1, it actually marks it or blocks, passes it or blocks it. But there are some gray areas where it actually kind of escalates or marks it, where human oversight can be used to kind of mark it, saying that, hey, here are the 10 scenarios where you should start blocking, right? And in some cases, if you give certain behavior, it will keep learning by itself and become smarter over time. So this is a good example in the 6 steps that it talks about how the prompts and responses are actually scanned in real time at the scale of Microsoft. You're talking about hundreds and thousands of B2B and B2C customers, and it is very much possible to be done. You could either piggyback on some of these hyperscalers and you build your application, but then you can actually plug this in the middle, or you could build it by yourself, which is a little more complex. If you are a large company and you are looking to build it by yourself, then you'll be able to do it. So there are various different ways the governance is happening. Governance, if you look at my the chart on the left, so you see that on the top you have worldwide independent body, right? Just like you have IEEE, when the internet was coming into being. So there were certain consortiums that were actually built to build protocols for the rest of the world to use, and like IP addresses, or we are talking about like how the TCP IP works and everything, like telecommunications, how the satellites used, all the frequencies and everything kind of standardized. Similar thing needs to happen for generative AI. We are in that direction, but today we do not have any worldwide body yet. But governments, like for example, Indian government came up with certain policies, Chinese government, and different countries' governments are actually trying to protect within them. Then you're talking about cloud level. Cloud is basically Microsoft and AWS. They also have certain. I think they are, I would say, most mature so far because they are the providers, but also they are actually trying to improve on the governance as they speak. So that's good. And then we are talking about the product level. So product is nothing but I'm building my product, and I want to make sure that within the product I build some kind of a deterrence or governance. I could do it, which means even when the prompt is being captured, I do a lot of filtration right there, and then just make sure that the safe stuff actually goes out. So there are 5 different levels that we have. Yeah. So last but not least, so ML ops has become very, very important. So, and ML ops and governance is kind of go hand in hand. So if you don't have this team already, I would strongly recommend, even if it is a 1% team or a half a percent team, we need a dedicated bunch of folks looking into it very, very deep, because DevOps controls and ML of controls in a way has a very little overlap. So you need that skill and knowledge for people to be able to actually look at all these areas and take it from there. And here are the takeaways of this session, as well as the entire series, podcast series that we have. Generative AI is here to stay. No two ways about it. It's not a one-time phenomena. It's not a hype. These were the questions were asked to me like in Q2 and Q3 last year. Hey, Shri, like, do you think it'll exist by the time we are in 2024? So all those myths hopefully are clear now, right? And use cases drive business value and revenue. So essentially, the second bullet I'm talking about is all about how do we come up with certain use cases that add value to customers. It's not about selling generative AI to your customer. It's about selling the value, how their life or business is going to get better using your use cases. So third one is the governance drives prevention of risks and business credibility, which is goes without saying. And every time you have a system that you're building in generative AI, make sure that there is also governance goes along with it. They cannot live without each other, right? Dedicated teams are required for ML ops and governance. This is important. A part-time cannot help because it needs a lot of research and knowledge. And also there is also maker checker problem. So if I have a engineering team that is building AI features, same team cannot do governance, and you got to actually build a separate team, both in terms of compliance and sanity. Cross-functional teams for use case discovery and engineering. So use cases. So in the past, if a company has multiple products, they don't need to necessarily work together while they are building, because they could have mutually exclusive functionalities, right? Today, it is important that they work together, because a use case that I used in one product could be reused in other cases with the same model, or slightly with this like a modification. Like I was talking about the article generation or email campaigns, or a lot of that stuff could be actually. So the synergy will help us save time. Top level compliance authority. So this is another thing. You could actually have a compliance consortium who's like a big brother or big sister sitting on top, represented by some CXO, sponsored by, who always looks at models that are coming in, what kind of investments we are making in, and there is a compliance authority there. So expect disruption in every field. So there's no field is accepted exempted from this generative AI. Every field is going, like your pharmaceuticals to oil and gas to agriculture. None of them will be spared. Like everybody will be pleasantly disrupted. It's all about we finding it and riding the wave, and it's all about fail forward method is the recipe to lead. Initially, we feel like we are not making any progress. Probably we don't have enough skill set or talent within your company, but it's all about iterative fail forward method, which we used in SaaS industry as well, but it makes a lot more sense here, right? So with that, I'm kind of concluding this one. So any thoughts, questions, Satya or
No, it's
team?
amazing. I think last three episodes have been really informative in terms of all these things. Thanks a lot, Sridhar, for all the valuable inputs. With that, I just want to add one disclaimer to the overall stuff. I think we have spoken quite a bit. So just want to say, like, our panelists will be sharing their personal opinions and knowledge and expertise in their respective field. Views are their own and do not represent the official positions or policies or endorsement of companies they work for, and all the discussion is intended to reflect their individual experience and insight, right? So with that, I think we conclude this three-part series, and thanks a lot, Sridhar. Pleasure having you here.
Thanks, Satya. Happy to be here, and thanks for having me. See you on the like the next episodes or like the next series sometime in the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.